Welcome to the Her Story Circle podcast, the podcast that brings you the extraordinary tales of everyday women who are changing the world. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and I'd like to acknowledge traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. I also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. Every week, we dive into the lives, challenges, and triumphs of women from all four corners of the globe. We're here to inspire, enlighten, and connect, sharing stories that uplift and empower. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and join us as we explore the incredible journeys of women shaping our future. This is Her Story, where every woman's voice matters. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Her Story Circle. This is Gertrude Mache here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of yet another fascinating young woman. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, and share your story with us today.
Hi, I'm Samantha Vaive, but I go by Sam, and I am in the beautiful state of Michigan in the United States. And my story starts, I guess, from the very beginning, because while I always knew that I wanted to be a mom, somewhere at a very young age, I learned that that was what I wanted and that that's what I was supposed to be. And so my whole life was kind of driven by this idea that someday I would be a mom. And I never really understood what that meant or the impact that it had on me until I read the book Flux by Peggy Ornstein. She's a phenomenal author, and I recommend all of her books. But in Flux, she talks about how women reach a point, usually in their early to mid 20s, where they have to make a decision. Are they going to be solely focused on career? Or are they going to sort of be half in, half out because they know that someday they're going to have to make some level of sacrifice in their career to focus on family? And when I read that, I realized how I had kind of always been sort of episodic in my life because nothing really mattered. I knew that someday I was going to leave whatever I was doing behind to focus on being a mom. And I got married really young the first time when I was 21. And my first husband was in the Marine Corps. And I wanted so badly to get pregnant right away. I was young at 21, but I was surrounded by a lot of like 18-year-old moms who were already pregnant or getting pregnant for the second time. And they all had kids. And I just wanted it so badly. And he kept saying, no, he didn't want to have kids while we were in the Marine Corps. And I became so fascinated by pregnancy and birth and human milk feeding. And I just wanted it so badly. I actually wanted to become a professional surrogate. I think that was kind of my dream career. And I begged him to do that as well. And he said, no, absolutely not. And so when he left, I didn't know what to do with myself. I didn't know what my life was going to be. I was very lost. So I started looking into IVF and getting pregnant on my own and was kind of talked out of that. And at the time, it felt really hard to walk away from that idea. But I started to just accept to some degree that that wasn't a life I was going to have. And when I say I started to accept it, what I really did was shut down any sort of possibility. I just didn't let myself go there. And I never expected what came next in my life. I didn't expect to meet Derek, and I didn't expect to fall in love with him. And I certainly never expected to get married again or to have the conversation of kids come up. But having kids was really important to him, and that door sort of opened again, and it became so important to me. And I'm the type of person that never does anything without going all in. My therapist would say I'm a black and white thinker, but I struggle with those gray areas. I work on it a lot, but it was like, okay, we're going to have kids, then we're going to do it like this. And I gave up sugar for a year before we even started trying to get pregnant. I gave up caffeine, gave up gluten. I already was a vegetarian, But then people told me I had to start eating meat. And so I started eating meat and I was miserable. I would sit and I would cry over these plates of food that I didn't want to be eating, but I was determined because I was going to get pregnant and it was going to be amazing and I was going to have the best pregnancy. And it's kind of odd looking back and thinking, yes, me crying over a bowl of meat was what I thought was the best pregnancy. But I was so confident. I mean, I was writing a blog about how to get pregnant and how to have a great pregnancy and how to have great birth. And I wasn't pregnant. And I thought we would get pregnant really fast. Derek thought we would get pregnant the first month. And when we didn't, he was really disappointed. And that kind of snapped me into some reality where I was like, okay, well, it doesn't usually happen like that. 3 months, it'll happen. And then 3 months came and went, and then 6 months, and then 9 months. And then we were in a global pandemic. And so prior to lockdown, becoming pregnant was pretty much consuming me. It was all I thought about. I was tracking everything. I was reading everything. I was watching documentaries. I mean, it was just my whole life. But once we went into lockdown, I mean, there was nothing but getting pregnant. And I'm honestly surprised it didn't destroy my marriage. It destroys a lot of people's marriages. And it was just, it consumed everything. I stopped being a whole person. And I still wasn't getting pregnant. Actually, Peggy Ornstein has another great book called Waiting for Daisy, where she talks about her struggles with infertility. And while it's an incredible story, and I love the book, spoiler, in the end, she does get pregnant. And it gave me this intense sense of, see, she struggled the way I did. She went through everything I did, and she got there. So we just have to keep going. We just have to keep going. And so then the interventions started to get greater. I was dealing with a lot of horrible doctors, some that were good, some that were really dismissive, some that didn't understand where I was coming from. And it just kept getting worse, but I was determined. And so we did an IUI that was supposed to be, everything looked great. And I remember just sitting there watching the countdown until I was supposed to know. You know, we were going to get the results. And then I called and the woman's like, oh yeah, let me check your results. And then there's just silence on the other end of the line. And then she goes, oh yeah, your pregnancy test was negative. And so we went the next step to IVF, which was something I swore at the beginning. I was like, I will never do IVF. This is not what I want. I will never, ever do IVF. And you never know what you're going to do until you're in that moment. And how do you look at someone who you love and say, this is my line? And so we decided to go for it. And everything was ready for us to do IVF. We had the appointment scheduled, and Roe v. Wade got overturned, which, if you're not familiar where you live in the United States, Roe v. Wade is access to abortion care. And when that happened, I said, this isn't safe anymore. And a lot of people looked at me and were like, what are you talking about? This has nothing to do with trying to get pregnant. Like, you want the baby. And I was like, if you're not familiar with IVF or the infertility world, trust me, this is no longer safe. And now we're seeing that here in the States with how Roe v. Wade being overturned is affecting Alabama and other states, and what's happening with frozen embryos and all this other stuff. So I know I made the right decision, but it was so hard, and I fell into a really deep depression. And I'm a yoga teacher, and I am very lucky to be trained by Melissa Spammer, a phenomenal yoga teacher, and to be in her lineage. And I was on retreat with her, and I was just so broken. I didn't even know who I was anymore. And she said, just randomly, choose the life that chooses you. Choose the life that chooses you. And it hit me. It hit me like a brick wall. So much so that I have it tattooed on my body so I don't forget. And I thought, yeah, I can keep fighting and punching and banging my head against the wall and be miserable. Or I can accept the reality that I probably won't ever have the life that I thought I was going to have, and instead choose to love the life that I do have. And so now every day I try and focus on, this is the life that I get. So how do I make it the best life that I can? And I know that that's not for everybody. I know some people are going to see this and think, I can't believe you ever gave up. I know for me, I thought for a long time, just the fact that I could get to this point meant that I didn't want it bad enough. And because I didn't want it bad enough, I didn't deserve to be a mom. And you can get so in your head in that way that it's your fault. You have to want it more. You have to try harder. You have to this, that, or the other thing. But for me, I just couldn't do it anymore, and I had to learn to be happy.
Wow. What an amazing story, Samantha. What a moving story. You know, motherhood is such a blessing and a gift, and something that most women aspire to experience. And for you not to have had that privilege is really quite sad, but the way you have handled the whole situation is amazing.
Thank you.
So tell me, what are some of the emotions and thoughts that you experienced when you decided to cancel your IVF plans after the overturning of Roe v. Wade?
So, anger. I think a lot of women in the United States experienced anger when Roe v. Wade got overturned for a variety of reasons, right? We lost our rights, and I was already dealing with something that was so personal and so hard, and to have that choice taken away from me was infuriating. But if I'm being perfectly honest, and I do not want to undercut anybody else's experience or say that there is anything positive about a bunch of people, mostly men, making decisions about women's bodies, but I think some part of me was relieved because I didn't have to fight in the same way anymore. You know, when someone takes away your power, sometimes good, bad, or whatever, you just are resolved to the fact that your power got taken away.
Mm-hmm.
And I would never say that that's a good thing, but it did offer me some degree of relief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, how has your own experience with infertility influenced the way that you interact and support pregnant individuals in your current role?
So, it's funny that you ask that because what eventually happened is I am now a childbirth educator, and I started that path not knowing that I wasn't going to get pregnant. I kind of started that path thinking, I'm going to use all this information for me, and then I'm going to squirrel it away and go off and be a mom. And I'm not. And so
Mhm.
there are moments when I am like, what did I choose to do? Like, this was the worst decision I could possibly make. I will see people, pregnant people. I will have friends with babies, and I'll be like, I don't want to see your baby. Like, I don't know. And it's so hard. And then there are days when I'm like, yeah, I could have gotten pregnant, and maybe I could have taken all of this knowledge to have the best childbirth that anyone has ever had. And then what? I would have gone and been a mom and hopefully raised an amazing kid or kids, whatever. But now I get the opportunity to help lots of people have
Yeah.
amazing births. And in a way, that's a bigger impact. I get to help more people, more babies. And so, yeah, I try to remind myself that this is bigger than me. It's bigger
Yeah.
than me and any kids that I would have.
So, can you describe the kind of support or resources that are most helpful to you during your infertility journey?
So, in the beginning, and I think anyone who's struggled with infertility kind of experiences the same thing, it's all about like the Facebook groups. you feel so alone. You feel
Yeah.
so alone that you just want anyone to talk to you. And here's the weird sort of caveat about it that I think is different than when you're struggling with other things in life.
Yeah.
Um, we have very good friends who struggled with infertility right before we did and made the decision to stop trying right before we
Huh.
started trying. And
Okay.
I couldn't understand. I could not understand them. And so then when it came to my journey, I didn't really want to reach out to the people that I knew. There's some level of fear that you're going to get pregnant and then it's going to make them feel worse, or
Mm,
that your decisions are just not going to be the same. And so, as much as you want support, you want sort of anonymous support. And so,
right.
you lean into these groups, but it's like anything else with social media, it just becomes this hole and you're in it. And it was like hours a day. And I'm checking the first thing when I get up in the morning and who's, whose pregnancy test came back positive and who's came back negative and who's now
Um,
getting divorced because it was so awful, and how much money did this person spend, and you just get so into it that it becomes really unhealthy. And so
yeah.
it's so difficult because you need that support and that community, but you also need to not get sucked into that support and
Yeah.
that community. I mean, balance in all things, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I can so see how it can work for you and against you at the same time.
Yeah.
So, what misconceptions about infertility do you think are the most common, and
Hmm.
how do you address them in your conversations or work?
So I think one thing that's a pretty common misconception is that it's primarily the female. Now in my case, it was me, but that is not always the
Always the
case.
case. Yeah.
And I mean, right now we need to be aware that sperm counts are declining
Very low.
worldwide, but especially in the United States. Um,
Mhm.
we're getting to a point where people should start becoming kind of alarmed by this.
Mm,
And I think the other sort of, I guess there's two other really important misconceptions. One is that IVF is not a totally consuming, life changing thing. People expect you to just like keep going to work every day. And if you
mm,
talk to any like full-time worker who's doing IVF, it's like it's insane. That's the other thing. You're on Etsy all the time looking at like medication management kits and all the things to hold your syringes and the cute little stickers that you put on there. And it's a whole industry. The
yeah.
other thing, and I think is the most painful thing that people don't realize they're being painful, is when they say, why don't you just adopt? Why are you doing this? Just adopt. And it's not that simple. I mean, I know
Mm,
I know people who spent more than $50,000 adopting. I know someone who went bankrupt adopting. There are stories of people who spend years going through this process and never get a
mm,
kid. There was one person on one of the Facebook groups who spent over $50,000 to adopt a kid, and in the final hours, it didn't go through, and so they
wow.
lost the money and the kid and the time. And I'm sure I'm on this podcast talking about my life, but generally my husband and I are very private people. We have rescue dogs. We don't like people coming in and out of our house. And when you adopt, your whole world gets opened up. People can come into your
Mhm.
house, they talk to everyone you know, and if you foster to adopt, then you might have different kids coming in and out of the house. That is a lot of strain on animals. It's a lot of strain on a family.
Yes.
And so it's not as easy as like snap your fingers and decide to adopt and you get a baby. Plus, a
Mhm.
lot of countries internationally are saying they don't want Americans adopting their kids anymore because we took so many kids from other countries for so long. And lots of countries are having declining birth rates, or they just don't want their kids going to the United States. For us
Mhm.
too, my husband is Ojibwe, and being in the native culture is very, very important to us. I mean, it's a huge part of who we are. And we don't want to be in a situation where we have a kid who's not native, we adopt a kid from a different culture and we're like, this is your culture now. That doesn't work.
Exposing it. Yeah.
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 And I don't know things about cultures that aren't my culture. And I don't want to take a kid from another culture and take something away from them.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place here.
Absolutely.
Wow. Yeah, I can't imagine what that's like. And you're right. People think adoption is a very simple and straightforward thing to do, but it has its own complications as well.
Absolutely.
So, on the days when working with pregnant people, feeling heartbreaking, how do you manage those emotions and continue to provide the support?
So I think I do two things. When I said that, I chose the life that chose me, one of the things that we did is we said, okay, we were going to spend all of this money on IVF.
Mhm,
What can we do instead? And I love to travel. And
mhm.
so I try now to always have some sort of very exciting trip planned. I went to the Galapagos, which when I booked the trip, I was like, oh, I'm just doing this to like give myself something to look forward to. I'm never going to go because I'm going to be pregnant. And then I went on the trip and I thought that I'm going to be miserable the whole time. It was incredible. It's phenomenal. I never thought about the fact that I wasn't pregnant. I just thought about penguins. um, Derek and I are going to Iceland this September. And so when things are hard, I think, look at all the amazing things that I get to do that I'm very aware I would not be doing if I was pregnant. And the
Yeah.
other thing that I do is I focus on the other person. It's not about me. As hard as it
Mhm,
is sometimes, it's not about me. Their reality is that they are going to birth a baby. And sometimes they don't
mm.
want to do it. And actually, a lot of times, I mean, during the pandemic, fear of childbirth rose to over 60%.
Yes.
60% of women had such a high in the United States had such a high fear of childbirth that impacted their ability to live on a daily scale.
Yeah.
And so when you're looking at someone who's in that fearful reality, it kind of snaps you out of it because this is an imminent problem that I can help solve.
Mhm.
So I guess in some ways it gives me back some degree of the control that I lost.
Yes. It kind of gives you back some power.
Mhm.
Wow. Yeah, you never really think about these things in this way until you talk to somebody who's walked the walk and
Mhm.
really experienced it firsthand. So, what advice would you give to those who are struggling with infertility and might be feeling isolated and misunderstood?
Well, I think first off, you really need to know yourself and
Mm,
know what what you want out of life and what your limits are and what your motivations are. And that's so much easier said than done because like I
mhm.
said, I had a limit. I was never going to do IVF. And then when that step came around, it was like, no, yeah, I'll do it. I'll do anything. And I think we talk about that a lot in childbirth too. You have limits, but ultimately when things become life threatening, you have to make the decision to have that C-section even if you didn't want to.
Yes.
And sometimes life just happens. It just happens. So, particularly in my classes, we talk about how do you cope? How do you stay calm? What do you do when life becomes the thing that you didn't think you wanted, the thing you thought you couldn't do? Because you can do it. You
Yeah.
can. And it's such a hard thing to give advice on because you want to be positive. You want to say never give up, right?
Yes.
Never surrender. Goonies never say die. But sometimes you have to. And I think you have to ultimately prioritize you and your life and your day because ultimately it's finite. We only get so many days and we never know how many days we're going to get. So you have to
Mm,
decide how you want to live them and what you want to do with them. And maybe for you, it's worth it. It's worth it knowing that you'll never know the outcome and you're okay waking up sad every day. And if that's okay with you, then great. Never give
mm.
up. but it wasn't okay for me. I couldn't do it anymore.
Wow. Absolutely amazing. So, how do you balance the joy of helping bringing babies into the world with the personal heartache that you sometimes feel?
You know, okay, so I have a niece who is not really my niece. I call her my niece because her dad is like my best friend. He became my family. There was a point in my life prior to me being with Derek that, you know, we would call each other our automatic RSVP plus ones. So like if one of us got invited to a wedding, we could always RSVP plus one. But then if one of us wanted to take a date, we could just say, oh, never mind, I'm taking this date now. And
Okay.
yeah, he really became my family. And so his daughter, who was 8 when I met her, became very important to me, and she's still probably one of the most important people in the world to me. She just turned 16 and I'm very proud of her. Yesterday was her last day as a sophomore. But
Wow.
he is about to have a baby. And when we went out to breakfast as we do regularly, and he was like, I have to talk to you about something. And I was like, okay. And he was being really weird. And he was like, but I don't want to tell you until after we're done eating. And he was like really like agitated and kind of all over the place. And his grandmother had been sick. So I thought something had happened to his grandmother. And I was like,
Mm.
you're being so weird. And so I'm like, okay, we're done eating. Like, what's going on? He's like, let's go outside. Like, let's walk to the cars. And I'm like, okay, like, what is going on, dude? And he's like, kind of like pacing, and he's like, okay, I have to tell you something. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, you know, we're having a baby. And I was like, oh, no. He said, do you want to be a godmother? And I was like,
Yes.
what? And he was like, we're having a baby. And I was like, that's amazing. And I think there was a microsecond
Mhm.
where time froze, and it started to be like everything inside me was going to rip open. And
Mm.
so fast, it sealed back up. And I was like, this is incredible. And he was so scared to tell me. He was like, I understand. He straight up said to me, I understand if you don't want to be in my life anymore.
Oh.
And I was like, why would I want that? Like,
Oh.
I'm so happy for you. I'm so excited to be in this baby's life. I'm excited to
Mhm.
be a godmother or whatever. I don't like that term, so we're trying to come up with a better term. Um, and so I think you have to remember that there are different ways to have joy and
Yeah.
different ways to have kids in your life. And in some ways it's really nice because I can help take care of this baby and still go to Iceland. you know, you just have to get creative in your thinking. And so
Yeah.
often in life we have these ideas that are like, this is how you do this. This is how this is supposed to be. This is what this
Yeah.
means. And that's not true.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can be a family in a lot of ways.
I love the way you've reframed all of that. It really just turns everything into something positive. So, are there specific policies or changes that you wish to see in the healthcare to better support those dealing with infertility?
Yes. And actually, I think someday I actually wrote a science fiction short story about a woman sitting in like a government services offices, and it's very plain sort of room, and she's going through all filling out all of this paperwork, and what you come to realize in the end is she's applying for aid to be able to leave her job to do IVF.
Okay.
Um and when I wrote the story, it was like this far off like sci-fi kind of thing. But as infertility increases, I mean, we've already gone from 1 in 8 couples were infertile to now it's 1 in 6, which is
Wow,
crazy.
a lot.
Um, Governments are gonna need to start becoming more supportive of helping people get pregnant. I mean, in Japan, right, they have all of these, like, the government will give you wedding gifts if you get married, and they sponsor these like singles events that are incredible because they want people to get married because they need more babies to support their economy. But we're all going to get there, and it's not just going to be a choice of whether or not people want to, it's whether or not people are able to. So more support. I mean, 100% insurance should cover IVF. I mean, it doesn't. I know so many people who get jobs at Tractor Supply Company or Starbucks because they can't, or Amazon. That's a big one. People will go get jobs at Amazon only long enough to cover their IVF treatment.
Right.
So definitely that, but also, you know, policies in general. I mean, the government in the United States and anywhere else that it's an issue just needs to stop trying to dictate what people do with their bodies in all levels of it. They can't understand what it's like to be in a person's body.
Yes.
And everybody's body is different. Everybody's body needs different things and on different days. And so we need to start supporting people and believing that they are capable of making the right decisions for themselves.
Yeah. So can you explain the concept of the fear to pain cycle in childbirth and how your mind, body, birth approach helps to address it?
Yeah. So one of the sort of foundation parts of my program, my approach is called Mind Body Birth, is breaking what I call the big lie. And the big lie is that childbirth is inherently awful and terrible and painful. And if you've ever seen it in a movie or on TV, right, it's like white knuckles screaming. Maybe the woman is like hitting somebody in the face because she's like, oh, why did you do this to me? Why did you get me pregnant? I mean, there's a whole website dedicated to screaming birth tropes. And it seems harmless. And on the one hand, it's not, because it's kind of poking fun at women in a way that we've just kind of casually accepted poking fun at women. But it's also harmful because when you see that and you see it over and over and over again, you learn. We're social learners, right? We need to learn socially to adapt and survive. So at an evolutionary level, your brain is going, this is important information for survival. Your brain doesn't know it's not real, it's TV. And so you learn childbirth is terrible, awful, painful, worst thing you can experience. And what that does when you start to go into labor is terrifies you. And when you're scared, your cortisol levels increase. And what we know this scientifically, cortisol makes pain feel more painful. I want to put a little asterisk on there because some cortisol is good. You do need some cortisol for labor. But when cortisol gets too high, your pain feels more painful.
Right.
So now you're scared, your cortisol goes up, your pain gets really painful, and you think, it's true, they were right, this is awful. So then you get more scared. So then your cortisol increases even more, and the pain gets more painful, and the cycle just keeps continuing. No, you don't have to do that. You don't have to be a part of that. That does not have to be your story. Your story can be beautiful, wonderful, joyful birth. It is real. It exists. It can happen.
Yeah.
You just have to believe and know that it can. And it seems like such a weird, I don't know, sort of hippy dippy thing. You just have to believe it. But it's true because it changes your brain chemistry, which changes the biological functioning in your body.
Right. Fascinating stuff. Now, your doctoral research focused on improving childbirth experiences and outcomes. Can you share some key findings and how they've influenced your practice?
Yeah. So when I started my doctoral program, I didn't even really know where I was going to end up. I didn't really plan to study childbirth. I was fascinated by human milk. And I wanted to help improve breastfeeding success rates, or I call it BBC feeding, breast, chest, body feeding. And with my background in yoga, I wanted to look at the relationship between yoga and human milk feeding success. And
Right.
so I started getting into this research, and the more I looked at it, the more I realized there are several factors that occur during childbirth that will
Mhm.
impact breastfeeding success. And it's things like
Okay.
fear and anxiety, duration of labor, medical interventions, and all of these things have positive relationships with yoga. So people who do prenatal yoga have shorter durations of labor. They're less likely to be anxious about labor, childbirth.
Mhm.
They have lower rates of fear. They're less likely to have medical interventions. So I
Okay.
wanted to kind of draw that line. Now, for a variety of reasons that you can write about in my dissertation if you want to, the study didn't show that. But what it did show was it reconfirmed how important prenatal yoga is. And what's really interesting is that if you go through the research, yoga is not clearly defined. Uh, in
Okay.
every single study, the amount that they did, what yoga aspects there were. So, like, were they doing strenuous poses? Were they doing gentle poses? Were they chanting? Were they meditating? Were they doing guided meditation? Were they doing breathing exercises? It's different in every single study. And yet
Right.
they all found a positive effect.
Okay.
So, I think that's so fascinating. And I hope to do further research on that in the future. But yeah, yoga is just so beneficial if,
Mm.
and this is a huge if, any stage in your life that you're doing yoga or anything else that you're doing, if it makes you feel good. I
Right.
know toxic yoga studios. I worked in toxic yoga studios. I worked in horrific yoga studios that I cannot believe are allowed to be businesses. I've worked with abusive teachers. So if you are in a situation where someone is making you feel bad about what you're doing or what's going on in your body or what your body
Mm.
looks like, or if someone is telling you you have to do it like this, do you know that not everybody has the same number of vertebra in their spine?
Mm.
Not everybody has the same number of vertebra in their spine. We believe we all do. We
Yeah.
don't.
Don't.
And so
Yeah.
if everybody doesn't have the same number of vertebra, how can every yoga pose be right for everybody?
Mm. Mm.
How can we expect them to look the same on everybody? We can't. And I feel
Considering your diverse personal and professional experiences, how do you ensure that your services are inclusive and sensitive to the needs of all families?
so inclusivity is huge for me. Actually, when I went to write my website, the very first thing that I wrote was my inclusivity statement because it's so important. So I
Yes.
think I already mentioned that I prefer to say BBC feeding, right? Breast, body, chest feeding, because not everybody is comfortable with the term breast. I try to be very gender neutral in all of my language, very
Right.
aware that not everybody who gives birth is female. And a lot of
Yes.
people kind of back away from me when I say that. It's true. It's going to become more and more true every single day.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, Not everybody is partnered. Not everybody just has one partner. I
Yes.
always say support persons, or people, because hey, if you have multiple people that make up your couple unit or your coupling unit or your family unit, as long as
Yes.
you're happy and everyone's a consenting adult, great.
And so be
Um,
it.
I also try to remember that not everybody will be keeping the baby that they birth. And it can be so hard for someone who knows that they are giving their baby up. I hate that term. Someone who
Mm.
is giving the gift of parenthood to somebody else,
Yes. Yeah.
which is, I mean, coming from where I come from, that is an incredible thing. It
An
takes
amazing gift.
so much strength. It's
Mm.
yeah, it's an amazing gift, but that doesn't make it any easier when you sit there and a childbirth teacher is all like, "Oh, you're going to love this baby forever," and all this stuff. That's not
Mm.
true for you. So
Yeah.
I try
Right.
to be really sensitive to that too in the language that I use.
Mhm.
What is so important for me is that when it comes to parenting and motherhood and birth and all of these other things, it is shrouded in shoulds, right? You
Yeah.
should have a natural birth. You should breastfeed. You should this, you should that, you should everything. And you know what? I will say, if every single person had phenomenal free healthcare, and I'm talking like Germany free healthcare where massage is included, like 100% free healthcare. If we
Yeah.
had universal basic income, if nobody had any trauma, if breast cancer wasn't a thing, I would say absolutely 100% everybody needs to breastfeed.
Mm,
But that's not true. No
that's,
one
that's
lives
right.
that life. And if
Yeah.
you are working 3 shifts at Taco Bell, or you're a nurse who's working 36-hour shifts or whatever else, that expectation is not appropriate
That's
for you.
unrealistic. Yeah.
And there's no reason that someone should feel bad about themselves because of the circumstances that they're in. So I say you need to make the best decision for you where you are at right now. And that
Yes.
decision can change tomorrow because things change and we get more information and stuff happens around us, right? But
Mm-hmm.
you need to make the right decision for you right now in this moment. And whatever that is, that's the right decision. It doesn't matter
Yeah.
what I think or you think or anybody else thinks. It doesn't matter what your doctor or your pediatrician thinks. It's the right decision for you. So we
Yeah.
talk a lot about like one of the modules in my course is on medical interventions. And I do this not so that somebody's afraid of an epidural or somebody fights against a C-section. It's
Mm,
because I want you to have all of the information so that you can make the right decision, A, and B, so if something happens that's beyond your control or even in your control, you can understand the sort of outcomes that can happen. And I do this because I'm kind of here because of this story. So I did the program. I struggled with infertility. I didn't know what I was going to do. I was writing my dissertation and I was just kind of like, I don't know where this is going. I'm going to graduate. Who cares? Right.
mm,
And I overheard a conversation between 2 women. And it was an
right.
older woman and a younger woman. And the younger woman was saying, I don't really know if I want to have kids. I don't think I do. But everybody says when you hold that baby for the first time, everything changes.
Mm,
And the
mm,
older woman got really quiet and she said, yeah, that didn't happen for me.
yeah.
And the way that she said it, I turned around and I said, I'm really sorry to interrupt your conversation. But did I
Mm,
hear you say you had a C-section? And she said, oh yeah, I had an emergency C-section. And I said,
mm,
oh, the medications that they give you during a C-section block the oxytocin receptors in your brain. So your body's flooding with bonding chemicals. You just can't necessarily feel it. And she just stared at me.
hmm.
And after a while, she goes, for 20 years, I've thought something was wrong with me. Why
Oh.
didn't anybody ever tell me? And all I said was, yeah, there's a lot that they don't tell you. She never
Yeah.
had any other kids because she thought she was fundamentally broken as a mother.
Oh,
And
man.
I don't want anyone to ever feel like that.
Man.
So I said, okay, I have to do something. I have to take this knowledge and I have to get it out there. And
Yes.
so medical interventions is a hard topic for me because I'm not that kind of doctor and I'm not like really right. Like I don't want anybody to be like, hey, you stay in your lane. But the reality is obstetricians have a job and their job is to save the life of the person giving birth and to save the life of the baby. That is their job. It is an important job. It is a noble job. It is a good job. But their job is not to be concerned about how these interactions are going to affect your mental health 6 months or 20 years later.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's where I come in to say, hey, let's talk about this because no matter what happens, you are not broken and you didn't do anything wrong.
Mm, mm. Oh my gosh, I could talk to you all night about this subject. This is such an important subject for a lot of women.
Mm-hmm.
So let me finish off with asking you this question.
Yeah.
If I could take you back to that young woman who had this amazing aspiration to be a mom, had visions, had dreams, was trying everything. If you could go back and give yourself 3 nuggets of wisdom,
Mm.
based on what life has taught you up until this point, what would you have wanted somebody to have said to you when you were starting this journey?
So first off, in all things, for all people, but especially people who are raised in female bodies, you need a cheerleader. And you don't just need, like, my spouse, he's wonderful, right? And he will say, I'll show him something, a half-done idea, and he'll go, it's amazing, it's incredible, you can do it, it's the best I've ever seen, which is great, but it's also not the most helpful or realistic. And it wasn't until I graduated and I kind of went, there's a thing, like there's like a post PhD slum where you don't know what you're doing anymore. And I had a friend take me out for lunch because he said, I see this in you and I'm worried about you, and what are you doing and who's your mentor? And then he connected me to a person who connected me to someone that she knew through her brother. And that person became my mentor. When I first met her, I'd sent her a draft of a journal article that I wanted to submit, and she sent it back, and 95% of it was redlined. And I thought, I'm mortified. This is awful. I'm just never gonna talk to her again. And I braved it, and I met with her, and she was amazing. And now we've been working together for months, and she's making me a better person. She's making me a better author. She's making me a better professional. And so you need someone who not only supports you, but will also be realistic about where you need to improve. So find those people. That is just so, so important. The other piece of advice I would say is to remember that you never know. Life is so unpredictable. It's just so unpredictable. And you can plan and you can try and control, and you can make yourself crazy. Ultimately, you just have to take things as they come, one decision at a time, amongst the things that are presented to you when they're presented to you. And it's hard. It takes a lot of surrender to accept as a human that you don't get to control everything around you. You don't get to be in charge. You just have to live your life, which brings me to the third piece of advice, which I wish I had gotten when I was younger, though maybe it wouldn't have stuck. But it's that Melissa Spammer advice: choose the life that chooses you. And I had a conversation with someone once about it, an older man at a conference. And I was kind of telling him my story, that I was in a difficult time and I felt like giving up, and I got this advice. And he said, and you just, it emboldened you, right? And you just kept fighting. And I was like, no, that was how I knew it was time to stop fighting. And it's a hard, hard thing for us, I think, as humans, to accept moving on to something else. But acceptance is a part of life.
I love it. Wow, Samantha, you have been on quite a journey. Thank you so much for coming online today and sharing your amazing story with our community. It's a really important subject, a subject people try to avoid talking about. But what you have managed to do with your life and where you are now sounds like the right place.
Thank you.
So your advice from your friend was very, very accurate.
Yes.
And thank you to everybody who's tuned in today. The Her Story Circle is a platform that brings you the stories and voices of women from all over the world. We share our stories to inspire you, uplift you, energize you, and empower you. So tune in again tomorrow when I interview yet another amazing guest. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world. And bye for now. Thanks again, Samantha.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Bye for now, everybody. Thank you for tuning into the Her Story Circle podcast. I hope today's story has inspired you to believe in the power of our stories and the difference you can make in the world when you use your voice. I'm Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a rich tapestry of diverse perspectives. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these stories with more listeners. Follow us on social media by looking for the Her Story Circle podcast for more updates. And join us tomorrow for another episode filled with courage, resilience, and empowerment. Remember, your story matters, and together we're building a stronger, more inclusive world. Until next time, keep making her